They called him expendable. That was actually the word his bosses used. He was the lowest rank in the organization. The guy who ran errands, who delivered packages without asking what was inside, who stood outside buildings in the cold while the important people sat warm inside. He made maybe $400 a week. The men above him were moving over $1 billion a year. And when it all came down, when the whole syndicate collapsed, when the arrests happened, when the money froze and the lawyers started screaming, investigators traced it all back to one moment. One decision made by the most unimportant person in the entire organization. Not the boss, not the accountants, not the lawyers who built the system. The Grunt, the expendable one. And the craziest part? He didn't even do it on purpose. Level 1. The machine. To understand what one insignificant man accidentally destroyed, you need to understand what he was working inside. This syndicate wasn't some street corner operation. It was a corporation. Just an illegal one. It had layers. At the very top, men nobody had ever photographed. Men whose names didn't appear on any document. Men who hadn't personally touched anything illegal in years because they had built enough distance between themselves and the actual crime that no law enforcement agency could reach them. Below them, managers, fixers, lawyers on retainer, accountants who knew exactly how to make dirty money look completely clean. Below them, mid-level operators, people who ran specific parts of the business, drug movement, money transfer, protection, each one operating in their own box, knowing only their piece of the puzzle. And at the very bottom, grunts, runners, errand boys, people like him. He knew almost nothing about the bigger picture. That was by design. If he got arrested, he couldn't give up what he didn't know. He was disposable by architecture, built into the system as someone who could be cut off and forgotten. The syndicate had been running this way for over a decade. Law enforcement had tried, multiple times. Federal investigations, wiretaps, undercover operations, millions of dollars spent trying to climb the ladder from the bottom up. They kept hitting walls because the men at the top had built those walls carefully, and the men at the bottom genuinely didn't know enough to bring them down. But something was about to go wrong, and it started with a mistake so small nobody even noticed it happening. Level 2. The Grunt. His name doesn't matter. What matters is his situation. He was 26 years old. No real education, no other options that felt real to him at the time. He had been doing small jobs for the organization for about 3 years. Nothing serious. Pick this up, drop that off, stand here, watch that door. He wasn't loyal to the syndicate. He wasn't ideological about it. He was just a young man who needed money and had found a way to get it that seemed manageable. But 3 years in, something changed. He started noticing things, not because he was investigating, not because he was brave or principled, but because when you spend 3 years running errands for the same organization, you start to see patterns. He noticed which addresses came up repeatedly, which faces appeared at which locations, which phone numbers got used for which types of jobs. He wasn't writing any of it down. He wasn't planning anything. It was just the kind of unconscious mapping that humans do when they're bored and paying attention. And then, one afternoon, he got arrested. Not for anything big. A minor charge. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong thing in his pocket. Small, routine. The kind of arrest the syndicate had handled dozens of times before. They expected him to stay quiet, take a minor charge, get out in a few months. That was the agreement when you worked at his level. But something happened in that interrogation room that nobody predicted. Level 3. The Room. He sat across from 2 investigators who had been trying to crack the syndicate for 4 years. They had files. They had wiretap fragments. They had pieces of a puzzle that never quite connected. And they had him, a nobody, an expendable grunt who wasn't supposed to know anything useful. They weren't even expecting much. This was almost a routine interview. But then, he started talking. Not because they pressured him, not because they offered him a huge deal immediately. He talked because he was scared. Because he was 26 years old sitting in a cold room, and suddenly the weight of 3 years working for dangerous people landed on him all at once. And because, without realizing it, he had been paying attention for 3 years. The addresses he remembered, the faces, the patterns, the phone numbers that stuck in his head for no reason, the delivery schedules that he had unconsciously memorized. Piece by piece, he handed the investigators something they had never gotten before. Not testimony from someone who knew the whole plan, but something almost more valuable: the texture of the operation, the small daily details that only someone at ground level would ever see. The kind of information that, when laid against the fragments investigators already had, suddenly made everything connect. Honestly, I want to ask you something right here. If you were him, 26 years old, scared, sitting in that room, would you talk? You have no guarantee of protection. The men above you have resources and reach. Talking could get you killed. Staying silent means years in prison for something you were barely part of. What do you actually do? Because almost everyone says they wouldn't talk, but almost everyone in that chair does.
Level 4. The thread that unraveled everything. The investigators took what he gave them, and they pulled. The addresses he remembered led to properties. The properties led to shell companies. The shell companies led to bank accounts that had been carefully hidden behind layers of legal structure for years. The faces he described, cross-referenced with surveillance photos that had been sitting in files with no context, suddenly had names. The phone numbers he half remembered, matched against call records that had been collected but never understood, started showing a network. One grunt, $400 a week, 3 years of unconsciously paying attention. And the walls the syndicate had spent a decade carefully building started coming down. But here's what made the syndicate's collapse so complete and so fast. When the first arrests happened, the mid-level operators panicked. Because they didn't know how much had been given up. They didn't know where the information came from. They didn't know who had talked or what had been said. And in that panic, they made their own mistakes, moved money too fast, cut off communication in ways that looked like guilt, tried to destroy evidence in ways that created new evidence. The Grunt's information hadn't just given investigators a thread. It had made the entire organization afraid of itself.
The killer ending. Within 18 months of that interrogation room, the syndicate was gone. Not weakened, not damaged, gone. 47 arrests across 3 countries, over $1 billion in frozen assets, property seized, accounts emptied by the government, lawyers arrested alongside their clients. Men who hadn't personally touched anything illegal in years, finally close enough to the evidence that the walls they had built couldn't protect them anymore. The boss, the man whose name had never appeared on a single document, who had spent a decade being completely untouchable, was arrested at an airport. He had been trying to run. And here is the question I want you to settle in the comments right now. Is the Grunt a hero? A man who finally did the right thing and brought down a genuinely evil organization? Or is he just a rat who saved himself at everyone else's expense and deserves no credit for the outcome? Because people are deeply divided on this. And I think which side you land on says something real about how you see loyalty and what it's actually worth. The syndicate had billions, lawyers, accountants, a decade of careful construction, multiple layers of protection designed specifically to survive exactly this kind of attack. And it was dismantled by a 26-year-old errand boy who made $400 a week, who just talked. The most expensive criminal organization in the region, brought down by the one person they never once worried about, the expendable one.